The emergency room doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss that cut through the humid night air. Nathan Brooks carried his daughter across the threshold, her small body limp against his chest, her breathing shallow and erratic. The fluorescent lights overhead turned everything the color of panic. White walls, white floors, white coats converging from three directions at once. A nurse materialized at his elbow, her hands already reaching. 6 years old, history of benign heart murmur, started complaining of chest pain 20 minutes ago, then collapsed. The words came out mechanical, rehearsed during the 7-minute drive that felt like 7 hours. Riley's eyelids fluttered. Her lips had gone pale, almost blue at the edges, and Nathan's mind cataloged that detail with the same precision he used to measure wood grain. Noting it, filing it away, refusing to let the implications paralyze him. They took her from his arms. The absence of her weight left him unmoored, standing in the middle of the corridor while gurneys rattled past and someone's phone buzzed with a notification that didn't matter to anyone except the person who'd sent it. He watched the double doors swing shut behind the medical team, watched them settle into stillness, and felt the architecture of his control begin to crack. A hand touched his shoulder. He turned to find Jo, his sister, still in the wrinkled blouse and slacks she'd worn to the courthouse earlier. Her eyes held the same question his throat wouldn't let him ask. "They'll stabilize her. They always do." Nathan nodded because speaking would require acknowledging that always had failed him once before, 3 years ago in a different hospital with different doors that had closed on a different person who hadn't come back out. The waiting room smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaning solution. He sat in a plastic chair bolted to the floor and stared at the television mounted in the corner. Volume muted, closed captions running half a second behind the images. A weather report, a car commercial, a news anchor with perfect teeth discussing something that happened somewhere else, to people he would never meet. Jo pressed a paper cup into his hands. The coffee was the temperature of disappointment, neither hot enough to burn nor cold enough to refresh, just tepid and brown and there. She's going to be fine. He wanted to believe her. Wanted to anchor himself to the certainty in her voice the way he'd learned to anchor load-bearing beams to foundation posts, distributing weight across multiple points so no single element carried too much strain. But belief required evidence, and evidence required time, and time moved like sap in winter, thick and slow and refusing to cooperate. His phone vibrated, a text from Mrs. Henderson, the babysitter who'd called him at the workshop, who'd kept her head while his world tilted, praying for Riley. "Let me know if you need anything." He typed back a thumbs-up emoji because words felt too heavy to lift. The clock on the wall ticked forward. 11:47 became 11:48. Someone coughed. A child cried somewhere deeper in the hospital, the sound muffled by walls and distance. Nathan closed his eyes and counted his own heartbeat, tried to find the rhythm Sarah used to tell him to breathe to whenever the weight of things got too close. 4 counts in, hold for 7, 8 counts out. By the 3rd repetition, his pulse had slowed from sprint to jog. A doctor emerged through the double doors at 12:03, and Nathan was on his feet before the man's mouth opened. "Mr. Brooks, Riley's stable. The episode was related to her existing murmur, but we're seeing some irregularities we want to monitor overnight. I'd like to keep her for observation and run a few more tests in the morning." The knot in Nathan's chest loosened half a turn. "Can I see her?" "She's sleeping. The sedative we gave her will keep her out for a few hours, but you're welcome to sit with her." Nathan followed him down a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion, past rooms where other families huddled around other beds, past a janitor mopping up something that left a pink streak across white tile. Riley lay in a bed too big for her small frame, an IV taped to the back of her hand, monitors beeping in soft, regular intervals that measured her existence in electronic pulses. He pulled a chair close and wrapped his fingers around hers, careful not to disturb the IV line. Her chest rose and fell with mechanical precision. The monitor traced her heartbeat across a green screen. Peaks and valleys that looked nothing like the messy, beautiful chaos of the heart he knew she had. The one that worried about stray cats and insisted on reading bedtime stories to her stuffed animals and asked questions about heaven that he still didn't know how to answer. Joe appeared in the doorway. "I'm going to head out. Let you have some time. Call if anything changes." He nodded without looking away from Riley's face. Joe's footsteps faded down the hall, and the silence that replaced them filled with the ambient hum of medical equipment keeping watch over his daughter's sleep. Nathan leaned back in the chair and let his eyes drift to the window. Outside, the parking lot lights cast orange pools across empty asphalt. A security guard made rounds past rows of cars that belonged to people having the worst nights of their lives. Beyond the lot, the city stretched out in layers of darkness punctuated by streetlights and the occasional headlights of someone driving home to problems that probably felt insurmountable until they weren't. His mind drifted backward, pulled by exhaustion and fear toward memories he usually kept locked behind the deadbolt of forward momentum. Sarah in a hospital bed not unlike this one, her skin paper-thin and translucent, her voice reduced to whispers that he had to lean close to hear. Riley had been 3 then, too young to understand why Mommy was always tired, why Daddy's eyes were always red, why the house filled up with casseroles from neighbors who didn't know what else to offer besides calories and sympathy. The oncologist had used words like aggressive and metastasized and palliative care, terms that Nathan learned to translate from medical jargon into the simple, brutal truth. His wife was dying, and there was nothing he could do except hold her hand and pretend he wasn't drowning. She died on a Tuesday morning in April while Riley was at preschool learning the alphabet. Nathan had been there, had watched her chest stop rising, had felt the exact moment her hand went slack in his. The nurse had said something about peace and dignity. He'd nodded because that's what you do when someone tries to gift-wrap tragedy in platitudes. For months after, he'd moved through the world like a ghost haunting his own life, waking up, feeding Riley, going through the motions of carpentry because wood didn't care if you were broken. It just needed to be measured and cut and joined with precision. Riley had been his anchor, the only thing that kept him tethered to the present when the past tried to pull him under. He'd sold the house where Sarah died, bought the smaller Craftsman on Maple Street because it had good bones and no ghosts and a backyard big enough for Riley to run in. The workshop he'd built in the garage became his sanctuary, a place where problems had solutions and everything could be fixed if you had the right tools and enough patience. The monitor beeped. Riley shifted in her sleep, her hand twitching against his palm. Nathan squeezed gently and watched her settle back into stillness. His phone showed 12:47. In 6 hours, the sun would rise on a day he hadn't planned for, hadn't accounted for in his carefully constructed schedule. The Jacobson cabinet order was due Friday. The Henderson dining table needed final sanding, and somewhere in the chaos of the last 3 hours, he'd lost track of whether he'd locked the workshop or left the lathe running or remembered to set out food for Riley's goldfish. None of it mattered. Not the deadlines or the details or the 100 small responsibilities that usually structured his days into manageable segments. The only thing that mattered was the rise and fall of his daughter's chest and the steady beep of the machine confirming she was still here, still breathing, still his. He must have dozed off because the next thing he registered was sunlight slanting through the blinds and a nurse checking Riley's vitals. His neck ached from the angle of the chair, his mouth tasted like old coffee and regret. Riley's eyes opened, unfocused and confused. "Daddy?" "Right here, baby girl." She blinked at the ceiling, at the IV in her hand, at the monitors. "Are we at the hospital?" "Yeah, you had some chest pain last night. Remember?" Her forehead creased with the effort of recollection. "I was drawing and then everything got fuzzy." The doctors are taking good care of you. They just want to run some tests to make sure everything's okay. She nodded, accepting this explanation with the same trust she'd shown when he'd explained where Mommy went after she died. A trust he'd spent 3 years trying to deserve. The doctor returned at 7:30 with a younger resident in tow. They asked Riley questions about her pain level and whether she felt dizzy and a dozen other diagnostic inquiries that she answered with the seriousness of someone being interviewed for an important job. Nathan watched her navigate the conversation with a maturity that shouldn't exist in a 6-year-old, that had been forged in the crucible of losing her mother too young and learning that life didn't always cooperate with what you wanted. We'd like to schedule a follow-up echocardiogram for next week. The irregularities we're seeing are likely just related to her existing condition, but I want to be thorough. Nathan's jaw tightened. Is there something specific you're concerned about? Not at this stage. Think of it as preventative care. We'll get a clearer picture of her heart function and go from there. Professional reassurance delivered with a smile that probably worked on most parents. Nathan wasn't most parents. He'd learned to read between the lines of medical optimism, to hear what wasn't being said as clearly as what was. When can we go home? I'd like to keep her until this afternoon, make sure she's stable through lunch. If everything looks good, you can take her home around 3. Riley perked up at this. Can we get McDonald's on the way home? The question was so normal, so perfectly 6-year-old, that Nathan felt something in his chest unclench. We'll see, which was parent code for yes, absolutely whatever you want. The doctor left. Riley asked for the remote. Nathan handed it over and watched her flip through channels until she landed on a cartoon about talking animals solving mysteries. The familiar theme song filled the room, and for a moment the hospital became just another place where life happened instead of a monument to things going wrong. Joe arrived at 9 with a bag from the diner down the street. Scrambled eggs, toast, hash browns that had gone slightly soggy in transit. Nathan ate mechanically while Riley picked at her hospital breakfast and narrated the cartoon plot with the earnest detail of a film critic explaining Citizen Kane. So the rabbit thinks the squirrel stole the acorns, but really the crow was hiding them for winter, and they all have to work together to... Daddy, are you listening? Every word. She studied his face with the kind of penetrating attention that children excel at, the kind that sees past the performance of okay into the truth beneath. You look tired. I am tired. Is it because of me? The question landed like a punch. No, baby, not because of you, never because of you. She seemed satisfied with this, turning back to the television while Nathan dealt with the sudden tightness in his throat that had nothing to do with the hash browns. Joe's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. I need to take this. Work thing. She stepped into the hallway, and through the half-open door, Nathan caught fragments of her side of the conversation. Something about a deposition and a motion to dismiss and a judge who was being unreasonable. His sister's life existed in a different world than his, one of courtrooms and legal briefs and battles fought with words instead of wood. But she'd dropped everything last night when he'd called, had shown up at the hospital without question or hesitation, and that counted for more than any shared DNA. She returned 5 minutes later. Crisis averted. For now. Thanks for coming. Where else would I be? It wasn't a rhetorical question. Jo had her own life, her own apartment across town that was currently uninhabitable due to a burst pipe that had turned her living room into a temporary swamp. She'd been crashing in Nathan's guest room for the past week, an arrangement that was supposed to be temporary but had stretched into something longer because the building's maintenance crew moved at the speed of bureaucracy. Riley's show ended. Another one started. The morning crawled forward in 15-minute increments measured by commercial breaks and vital sign checks. At 11, a different nurse brought Riley a lunch tray that she examined with the skepticism of a food critic confronted with questionable sushi. Do I have to eat the green beans? Yes. She sighed with the weight of someone asked to scale Everest and picked up her fork. Nathan's phone buzzed, a text from David Jacobson. "How's the cabinet coming? Still good for Friday?" He typed back, "Family emergency. We'll update you tomorrow." The response came immediately. "Hope everything's okay. Take your time." Which was gracious and understanding and still didn't change the fact that Nathan's carefully planned schedule had just imploded. The cabinet would take another 8 hours minimum to finish. The Henderson table needed 4. He had a consultation scheduled for Wednesday that he'd probably have to reschedule. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice that sounded like his father's lectured him about responsibility and commitment and not letting people down. He silenced that voice the same way he always did, by reminding himself that his first responsibility was to Riley, and everything else could wait. At 2:45, the doctor returned with discharge papers and instructions. Riley needed rest, no strenuous activity. Follow-up appointment scheduled for the following Tuesday. Nathan signed where indicated and tucked the papers into his jacket pocket. They stopped at McDonald's on the way home, as promised. Riley ordered chicken nuggets and a chocolate shake with the solemnity of someone placing an order at a 5-star restaurant. They ate in the parking lot with the radio playing soft rock classics that Nathan barely registered. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby." "When Mommy was sick, did she have to go to the hospital too?" The question shouldn't have surprised him. Riley was getting older, asking harder questions, trying to piece together a narrative about the mother she was slowly forgetting, despite the photos Nathan kept throughout the house like breadcrumbs leading back to Sarah's existence. She did a lot toward the end. Was she scared? He considered lying, considered offering comfort in the form of noble fiction. But Riley deserved better than that. Sometimes, but she was also brave. The bravest person I ever knew. Riley nodded, processing this. "Am I brave?" "The bravest." She smiled, satisfied, and returned her attention to the remaining nuggets. They pulled into the driveway at 3:40. The house looked exactly as he'd left it. Porch lights still on from the night before, Riley's bike lying sideways in the front yard where she'd abandoned it mid-ride. The normalcy of it felt surreal after the antiseptic unreality of the hospital. Joe's car was already parked on the street. She must have left earlier to get Riley's room ready, to create the illusion that everything was fine and under control. Nathan helped Riley out of the truck and up the front steps. She moved slowly, still tired from the medication and the ordeal. But her color had returned and her breathing sounded normal. Small victories that Nathan cataloged with the same care he used to track wood moisture content. Inside, the house smelled like whatever Joe had cooked for lunch, something with garlic and tomatoes. Riley headed straight for the couch and the nest of blankets Joe had arranged there. The television flickered to life with another cartoon, and Nathan stood in the doorway watching his daughter settle into the cushions like a bird returning to a familiar branch. Joe appeared from the kitchen. "I made pasta. There's leftovers in the fridge if you're hungry." "Thanks. How's she doing?" "Tired, but okay." Joe studied him with the same penetrating attention Riley had deployed earlier. "And how are you doing?" "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar." He didn't argue, just moved past her into the kitchen and stared at the coffee maker like it held answers to questions he hadn't figured out how to ask. "The Jacobson order can wait. David's expecting. I'll call him tomorrow." Joe leaned against the counter. "You know it's okay to admit this is hard, right? That you don't have to be superhuman all the time?" "I'm not trying to be superhuman. I'm trying to keep it together long enough to get through the next thing. And when does that end? When does Nathan get to breathe? When Riley's 18 and off to college and doesn't need me anymore?" The words came out sharper than intended. Joe's expression softened into something that looked like pity, and Nathan hated it, because pity meant she saw the cracks he'd been working so hard to conceal. "I'm going to check on her." He left the kitchen before Joe could respond, before the conversation could spiral into territory he didn't have the energy to navigate. Riley had fallen asleep on the couch, her body curled into a question mark, her breathing deep and even. He covered her with a blanket and settled into the armchair across from her, content to watch the rise and fall of her chest and listen to the ambient sound of a household at rest. His phone buzzed. Another text, this one from Mrs. Henderson. Heard Riley's home. Made you both some soup. We'll drop it by later. The kindness of neighbors. The small gestures that accumulated into a safety net he hadn't asked for but desperately needed. He typed back gratitude and set the phone aside. Through the window he could see the fence line that separated his property from the house next door. The craftsman with the sagging porch and the orange sticker that had been there for 3 days now, bright and insistent against the weathered wood of the front door. He'd noticed the woman who lived there in passing. Dark hair usually pulled back, clothes that suggested she worked from home or didn't work at all. A general air of someone trying very hard to be invisible. They'd never spoken beyond the occasional nod of acknowledgement when their paths crossed at the mailbox, but last night when he'd pulled into the driveway with Riley unconscious in the passenger seat, when panic had been a living thing clawing at his chest. He'd seen the light on in her upstairs window and caught a glimpse of her silhouette against the curtains. And for reasons he couldn't articulate, the sight had registered as proof that the world still contained witnesses, that whatever was happening wasn't happening in complete isolation. Now, in the gray afternoon light, her house looked abandoned. No car in the driveway, no signs of life beyond the orange sticker proclaiming judgment from the HOA. Riley stirred on the couch, mumbling something incomprehensible before settling back into sleep. Nathan checked his watch. 4:15. The day had evaporated into hospital hours and McDonald's runs and the slow decompression of crisis averted. His workshop called to him from the garage, full of unfinished projects and the familiar smell of sawdust and linseed oil. But the thought of leaving Riley, even with Joe in the house, even for the 20 feet between the back door and the workshop entrance, felt like a betrayal of priorities. So he stayed in the armchair and watched his daughter sleep and tried not to think about Tuesday's follow-up appointment, or the word irregularities, or the fact that life had a habit of taking things he loved when he wasn't looking. The house settled around him. Joe moved through the kitchen, washing dishes and humming something off-key. Outside, a car drove past. A dog barked. The sun angled lower, turning the light gold and warm. Nathan's eyes drifted closed, just for a moment, just to rest. When he opened them again, the room had gone dark except for the glow of the television. Riley was still asleep. Joe had covered him with a throw blanket and left a glass of water on the side table. The clock read 7:30. He'd lost 3 hours to exhaustion. His neck protested when he sat up. His back announced its displeasure with the armchair's support system. But Riley was still breathing, still safe, still here. Small victories. He stood, careful not to wake her, and moved to the window. The neighbor's house remained dark. The orange sticker glowed faintly in the streetlight's reach, a small beacon of bureaucratic disapproval. Nathan turned away and headed for the kitchen, where the smell of reheated pasta and the sound of Joe's off-key humming promised something close to normal, something close to okay, something close enough to get him through the next thing. Approximately Thursday had started like most Thursdays. Alarm at 5:30, coffee brewed strong enough to strip paint, Riley still asleep in her room while Nathan moved through the quiet house like a ghost attending to the routines of the living. Now it was 2:15 in the afternoon, 72 hours before the emergency room, and the fear and the realization that control was an illusion he'd been performing for an audience of one. The workshop smelled like walnut and sweat. Nathan ran his hand along the cabinet door he'd been sanding for the past hour, feeling for imperfections his eyes might miss. The wood was smooth, the grain tight and straight, exactly what David Jacobson had paid for when he'd commissioned a custom piece to replace the particle board disaster his wife refused to look at anymore. Riley sat in her usual corner, surrounded by crayons and construction paper, her tongue poking out in concentration as she worked on something that involved a lot of purple. "What are you making?" She didn't look up. "A picture." "Of what?" "The lady next door." Nathan's hand stilled on the cabinet. "The lady next door?" "Uh-huh. She always looks sad, like when you look at pictures of Mommy." He crossed to where Riley sat and examined the drawing. A figure in purple, dress or coat, impossible to tell, with brown hair and eyes that Riley had rendered as two dark circles with smaller circles inside, giving the impression of someone staring into middle distance. And below the eyes, a mouth turned down at the corners, unmistakable in its sadness. "Why do you think she's sad?" Riley shrugged. "She just is. I can tell." 6 years old and already fluent in the language of grief. Nathan wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was projecting, that not everyone who looked lost was actually lost. But children saw things adults learned to unsee, and Riley had spent enough time around sadness to recognize its shape. "Maybe we should give her the picture. Cheer her up." "Can we?" "Sure." Riley beamed and returned to her work with renewed focus. Nathan watched for a moment, then went back to the cabinet. The sanding block moved in steady strokes, muscle memory taking over while his mind wandered. He'd noticed the woman, Elena Morrison, according to the name on the mailbox, more in the past week than in the previous 6 months. Partially because Joe's presence meant more traffic in and out of the house, more opportunities to cross paths during the comings and goings of daily life. But also because the orange sticker had appeared 3 days ago, bright and impossible to ignore, and curiosity was a persistent itch. The sticker meant HOA violation. In this neighborhood, that usually meant aesthetic concerns, wrong paint color, unapproved landscaping, the kind of trivial tyranny that gave retired people with too much time a sense of purpose. But the woman's house looked fine from the outside. Old, yes. In need of some maintenance, certainly. But nothing that warranted official censure, unless the HOA had decided old craftsmanship was a liability in their pursuit of suburban uniformity. Nathan knew that battle. He'd fought it when he'd applied for the variance to run his custom furniture business from the garage. The board had dragged its feet for 3 months, citing zoning concerns and neighborhood character and a dozen other euphemisms for "we don't like it." He'd won eventually, but only because Joe had helped him navigate the bureaucratic maze and find the loopholes that turned suggestions into requirements. The thought of going through that again, of dealing with Patricia Drummond and her clipboard and her passive-aggressive emails about community standards, made his jaw tighten. Riley finished her drawing and held it up for inspection. "It's done." The woman in purple now had hands. 2 brown circles at the end of brown lines and what might have been a house behind her, rendered in blocky shapes that suggested windows and a door. "It's perfect. Can we give it to her now?" Nathan glanced at the cabinet. Another 2 hours minimum to finish the sanding, then the staining process that couldn't be rushed. But Riley's enthusiasm was a rare commodity these days, something to be encouraged rather than postponed. "Let's go." They walked across the driveway, Riley clutching her drawing like a diplomatic envoy bearing important documents. The afternoon sun turned everything gold and warm. A lawnmower buzzed somewhere down the street, the smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with the faint chemical tang of someone's pool, being shocked back to clarity after winter. Nathan hadn't been this close to the neighbor's house since he'd moved in. Up close, the wear showed more clearly, paint peeling around the window frames, gutters sagging slightly at one corner, the porch boards that creaked under his weight when he stepped up to knock. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Riley shifted from foot to foot, nervous energy manifesting as perpetual motion. The door opened. The woman, Elena Morrison stood in the gap, her expression cycling from surprise to confusion to something that might have been embarrassment. She wore a white button-down that had seen better days and jeans with a hole in the knee that looked accidental rather than fashionable. "Hi." Nathan's greeting came out more abrupt than intended. He tried again. "Sorry to bother you. My daughter made you something." Riley thrust the drawing forward. "I drew you! You're the sad lady." Elena's eyes went to the purple figure, and something in her expression cracked. Not quite a smile, but close enough to suggest the machinery still worked. That's very sweet." She took the drawing carefully, holding it like it might disintegrate. "I live next door, Nathan Brooks. This is Riley. Elena Morrison." An awkward pause filled with the ambient noise of suburban Thursday afternoon. Nathan became acutely aware that he smelled like sawdust and that Riley was staring at Elena with the unblinking attention of someone conducting a scientific study. "You have a sad face like Daddy sometimes." "Riley." "What? She does?" Elena's almost smile widened fractionally. "It's okay. She's not wrong." Another pause. Elena glanced at the orange sticker on her doorframe and the almost smile disappeared entirely. "I should let you get back to... I saw you bring a woman home last night." The statement landed with the weight of accusation softened by curiosity. Nathan blinked. "Around midnight. I happened to be up." Understanding dawned. "That was my sister. Her apartment flooded. She's staying with us while they fix the damage." "Oh." The syllable carried more disappointment than it should have. Elena's face colored slightly and she looked away, suddenly very interested in the drawing in her hands. "I wasn't... it's none of my business who you... Are you jealous?" The question came out before Nathan's brain could intercept it. Riley giggled. Elena's mouth opened, closed, opened again. What? No, I was just..." She trailed off into mortified silence. Nathan felt something like amusement stir beneath the layer of exhaustion that had become his default state. "The HOA sticker. What's that about?" Gratitude flashed across Elena's face at the change of subject. "They're claiming the porch is a safety hazard, and apparently the fence violates some aesthetic guideline they just invented. I have 14 days to fix it or they start fining me $200 a day. That's excessive. That's Patricia Drummond." The name alone carried enough venom to kill small plants. Nathan knew the feeling. "How much are the repairs?" $8,000, give or take." She said it flatly, like stating a fact about the weather. But her hands twisted the drawing slightly, and Nathan recognized the gesture as the physical manifestation of stress. Looking for somewhere to go. "Do you have..." "No." One word, final. The conversational equivalent of a door closing. Riley tugged on Nathan's sleeve. "Daddy, can we invite Miss Elena for dinner?" "Riley, I'm sure Miss Elena is busy. Actually, I'd like that." Both of them looked at her in surprise. Elena's expression suggested she was equally shocked by her own response. If it's not an imposition, I haven't had anyone to talk to in a while and..." She trailed off, looking down at the drawing again. "This is the kindest thing anyone's done for me in months. So, yes, dinner would be nice." Nathan found himself nodding before fully processing the invitation his daughter had unilaterally extended. "Tomorrow night around 6? I'll be there." They retreated back across the property line. Riley chattered about what they should make for dinner and whether Miss Elena liked spaghetti or if they should do something fancier. Nathan half listened, his attention caught by the orange sticker still visible on Elena Morrison's door. $8,000, 14 days, $200 per day in fines. The math was brutal. The timeline was designed to fail, and somewhere in the back of his mind where problem-solving instincts lived alongside the muscle memory of carpentry, an idea began to take shape. Friday evening arrived with the kind of golden light that made everything look like a postcard advertising the suburban dream. Nathan stood at the stove stirring marinara sauce while Riley set the table with the concentration of a surgeon arranging instruments. She'd insisted on using the good plates, the ones with the blue rim that Sarah had picked out 7 years ago at a discount store in Portland, and folding the napkins into triangles that approximated elegance. Joe leaned against the kitchen counter, wineglass in hand, watching the production with barely concealed amusement. "You know this is just dinner with a neighbor, right? Not a state dinner. Riley wants it nice. Riley wants you to have a life outside of sawdust and parent-teacher conferences." Nathan didn't dignify that with a response. The sauce needed another 10 minutes. The pasta water was heating. Garlic bread sat ready in the oven, wrapped in foil and waiting for the timer to grant permission. The doorbell rang at 6:03. Riley sprinted for the door before Nathan could wipe his hands on the dish towel. He arrived in time to see her fling it open with the enthusiasm of someone greeting a celebrity. Elena stood on the porch holding a bottle of wine and looking like she'd changed clothes 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that had a small stain near the hem she'd tried to hide by tucking it into her waistband. Her hair hung loose instead of pulled back, and she'd applied makeup with the careful attention of someone out of practice. "Hi, come in. Daddy made spaghetti." Elena stepped inside, her eyes taking in the living room with its mismatched furniture and Riley's drawings taped to the walls, and the general lived-in chaos that Nathan had stopped trying to control around the time Sarah got sick. "Thank you for having me." She handed the wine to Joe, who appeared from the kitchen with the kind of professional smile she reserved for opposing counsel. Jordan Brooks, the sister who caused all the confusion. Elena Morrison, the jealous neighbor. They shook hands while Nathan processed the fact that Elena had just turned her own embarrassment into a joke. Points for recovery. Riley grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her toward the dining table. "You sit here next to me. I want to show you my rock collection after dinner." "I'd love to see it." Dinner unfolded with the awkward rhythm of strangers trying to find common ground. Riley dominated the conversation, narrating everything from the plot of her current favorite cartoon to the complex social dynamics of first grade. Elena listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that suggested she actually cared about the answer. Nathan served pasta and garlic bread and watched the interaction with the detached attention of someone observing a science experiment. Elena ate slowly, savoring each bite like someone who'd been surviving on frozen meals in denial. Her left hand twisted the napkin in her lap whenever the conversation hit a pause. Joe steered the discussion toward safer territory, the weather, the neighborhood, the eternal question of whether the city would ever fix the pothole on Elm Street. Elena responded with the careful politeness of someone who'd spent too much time alone and forgotten how to be casual with other humans. "So what do you do?" The question came from Joe, friendly but probing. Elena's hand went still on the napkin. "I'm an interior designer. Freelance, mostly. The firm I worked for downsized 6 months ago. Tough market. That's one way to put it." Riley, oblivious to the undercurrent, launched into a description of the elaborate blanket fort she'd built in her room and how it had 17 rooms and a drawbridge made from a cardboard box. Elena nodded along, and Nathan caught the moment her expression shifted from polite interest to something that looked like longing. After dinner, Riley dragged Elena to her room to display the rock collection that consisted primarily of gravel she'd collected from various parking lots. Joe helped Nathan clear the table, her movements efficient and pointed. "She's nice. She's a neighbor. A neighbor you invited to dinner. Riley invited her to dinner, and you went along with it because—" Nathan loaded plates into the dishwasher with more force than necessary. "Because Riley wanted to do something nice for someone who's having a hard time. That's allowed." Joe raised both hands in surrender. I'm not criticizing, I'm observing. You haven't had anyone over since we moved you into this house 3 years ago. We have people over. Mrs. Henderson bringing casseroles doesn't count. He closed the dishwasher and leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted by a conversation that shouldn't require this much energy. What do you want me to say? I want you to admit that maybe, possibly, you're lonely. I'm not lonely, I have Riley. Riley's 6. You need adult humans in your life who aren't related to you or paying you to build them furniture. The sound of Riley's laughter filtered down from upstairs, followed by Elena's lower response. Nathan's chest did something complicated that he refused to examine. I'm doing fine. You're surviving. There's a difference. Joe touched his shoulder, brief and gentle. I'm going to head out. Give you two some space to be awkward without an audience. We're not, but she was already grabbing her jacket and calling goodbye up the stairs. The front door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. Nathan climbed the stairs and found Elena sitting cross-legged on Riley's floor, examining a piece of granite with the seriousness of a gemologist appraising a diamond. Riley knelt beside her, explaining the rock's origin story with the narrative complexity of someone describing an epic quest. And then I found this one at the grocery store parking lot, but Daddy said I couldn't take it because it was holding down the shopping cart return sign. That sounds like a very responsible rock. Elena looked up and caught Nathan watching from the doorway. Something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe, or recognition. The shared understanding of two people who'd both learned to perform normalcy while carrying weight that didn't show. It's getting late, Riley. Time to start winding down. But we haven't finished the collection. Miss Elena can come back another time. Elena stood, brushing dust from her jeans. I should get going anyway. Thank you for dinner, and for the rock tour. It was... She paused, searching for the right word. Human. It was human. Riley hugged her with the unself-conscious affection of someone who hadn't yet learned that touch could be complicated. Elena's hands hovered for a moment before settling on Riley's back, returning the embrace with visible uncertainty. Nathan walked her downstairs and to the front door. The porch light cast shadows that turned ordinary things mysterious. Riley really enjoyed having you here. I enjoyed being here. Elena's hands went to her pockets, then crossed her arms, then fell to her sides. The dance of someone who didn't know what to do with their body when conversation required stillness. About the HOA thing. If you need help, I can handle it. The response came too fast, too defensive. She caught herself and tried again. I mean, I appreciate the offer, but this is my problem. $8,000 in 14 days isn't a problem, it's a trap. Her jaw set in a way that suggested this wasn't the first time someone had pointed out the obvious. I'll figure something out. Nathan recognized that particular brand of stubbornness. He'd worn it himself for the better part of 3 years, insisting he was fine while everything slowly fell apart in ways that didn't show on the surface. I have a proposal. Her eyebrows rose. I'll do the repairs, you design my workshop expansion. Trade for trade, equal value. That's not equal. The labor alone is mine to offer. I need the expansion designed anyway. You need the repairs done. We help each other. She studied his face like she was reading a contract for loopholes. Why would you do this? Because no one did it for me when I needed it, and because Riley would never forgive me if I let the sad lady lose her house. The almost smile from yesterday reappeared, stronger this time. The sad lady. Her words, not mine. Elena looked down at her hands, then back up at him. I don't take charity. Neither do I. That's why it's a trade. Equal value. Equal value. She extended her hand. Nathan shook it, feeling calluses that matched his own. The evidence of work done with hands instead of just words. We start tomorrow, 6 a.m. Bring coffee and low expectations. I can do one of those things. She walked across the lawn toward her own house, and Nathan watched until she disappeared through her front door. The orange sticker glowed in the porch light, a small act of bureaucratic violence that he was suddenly unreasonably determined to defeat. Approximately Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. Nathan was measuring the porch supports when Elena appeared at 5:53 carrying 2 travel mugs and looking like someone who'd spent the night questioning every decision that led to this moment. "I brought coffee. No promises about quality." He accepted the mug and took a sip. It was terrible. Weak and over-sweetened and probably made from grounds that had been sitting in a cabinet since the previous administration. "It's perfect." They worked in silence for the first hour. Nathan called out measurements. Elena wrote them down on a yellow legal pad with the careful penmanship of someone who'd been trained to make presentations. The porch was worse than he'd suspected. Not just cosmetic damage, but structural failure that spoke to years of deferred maintenance and water intrusion that had been slowly destroying the bones of the building. He knelt beside the main support post and shone his flashlight into the gap between wood and foundation. The ledger boards completely rotted. Water got behind the flashing and compromised the rim joist. Elena crouched beside him, peering into the darkness. "Is that bad?" "It means the porch is essentially hanging by optimism and habit. One good storm and the whole overhang could shear off." Her face went pale. "How much to fix it?" "More than you want to know, but it's fixable. I'll need to sister a new joist to the existing frame and install proper flashing. 2 days of work, maybe 3. She pulled back from the inspection point and sat on the porch steps, legal pad clutched in both hands. "This is insane. You can't just volunteer to rebuild my porch." "I'm not volunteering. We have a deal. A deal that's completely unbalanced in my favor." Nathan sat beside her, close enough to smell the terrible coffee on her breath and the faint scent of laundry detergent that suggested she'd put on fresh clothes specifically for manual labor. "Let me ask you something. If our situations were reversed, would you help me?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Then accept that some people operate the same way you do." The legal pad crumpled slightly under her grip. When she spoke again, her voice carried the rough edge of someone fighting tears and losing. "My grandmother built the cabinets in the kitchen. My father planted the oak tree in the back. When everything else fell apart, the job, the relationship, the money, this house was the only thing that didn't move. If I lose it..." She didn't finish. Nathan understood the shape of that particular silence. "You're not going to lose it. You can't promise that." "I don't make promises I can't build." He stood and offered his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. "Grab that level. Hold it against the post while I check plumb." They fell into a rhythm, him explaining what needed to happen, her absorbing information with the focused attention of someone converting fear into knowledge. By noon, they'd mapped out the full scope of the damage and created a materials list that read like a small novel. Riley appeared at 12:15, having been deposited by Joe with instructions to not get in the way. She immediately got in the way, asking questions about every tool and offering suggestions that ranged from impractical to physically impossible. "What if we use glitter glue to hold the wood together?" "That's very creative, but glitter glue isn't rated for load-bearing applications." "What about really strong glitter glue?" Elena laughed, an actual laugh, not the polite acknowledgement of humor, but genuine amusement. The sound transformed her face into something younger, less haunted. They broke for lunch. Elena disappeared into her house and returned with sandwiches that were basically apologies on bread. Too much mayo, lettuce that had seen better days, bread that had gone slightly stale. Riley ate hers without complaint. Nathan forced his down and pretended not to notice when Elena only managed half of her own. "I'm not much of a cook. Neither am I. That's why we eat a lot of pasta. Pasta's good, pasta's reliable." The conversation was aggressively mundane and somehow comforting in its refusal to acknowledge the strangeness of the situation. Two near strangers rebuilding a porch because a 6-year-old had drawn a picture, and a man who'd spent 3 years in self-imposed isolation had decided that loneliness wasn't a sustainable long-term strategy. Jo arrived at 2 with her laptop and a file box full of documents. "Don't mind me, just doing some work while I'm technically not at work." She settled at Elena's kitchen table, spreading papers across the surface with the organized chaos of someone who thought in legal briefs. Nathan caught her glancing at the HOA notice on Elena's counter, saw the exact moment her professional interest activated. "Mind if I look at this?" Elena waved permission from her position on the porch where she was learning to use a circular saw under Nathan's supervision. Jo picked up the notice and read it with the intensity of someone scanning for weaknesses. "This is interesting." "Interesting how?" "Interesting as in the timeline is unreasonable, the fines are excessive, and the aesthetic guidelines they're citing were enacted 6 weeks ago without proper notice to residents." Elena's hand went still on the saw. "What does that mean?" "It means Patricia Drummond might have overplayed her hand. Give me an hour. I want to check something." She disappeared into the depths of legal research, and Nathan returned his attention to teaching Elena the difference between cross-cutting and rip-cutting and why the distinction mattered when you were trying to create pieces that would bear weight instead of just looking pretty. The afternoon bled into evening. The porch began to take shape, old wood removed, new supports measured and cut, the skeleton of repair visible in the lengthening shadows. Riley fell asleep on Elena's couch, exhausted by the combination of fresh air and the relentless energy required to narrate every observation that crossed her mind. Nathan found Elena standing in her kitchen, staring at the cabinet her grandmother had built. The wood was old maple, darkened with age, the joinery done by hand in a time before nail guns and precisely calibrated machines. "My grandmother emigrated from Italy in 1953. She was 17, spoke maybe 10 words of English, had $40 sewn into the lining of her coat. By the time she was 30, she owned this house outright." Elena's fingers traced the cabinet door's beveled edge. "She used to tell me that America was the place where you could build something from nothing if you were willing to work hard enough." I believed her, right up until the moment I realized that some people get to build and some people just get to watch their foundations rot. Your foundation's not rotting anymore, because you're fixing it, which proves my point. I couldn't do this alone. Nathan moved to stand beside her. "Nobody does anything alone. That's not failure. That's just how the world works." She turned to face him, close enough that he could count the variations of brown in her eyes. "When did you lose your wife?" The question should have felt invasive. Instead, it landed with the weight of someone who recognized grief and wanted to acknowledge its presence instead of pretending it didn't exist. 3 years ago, breast cancer, stage 4 by the time they caught it." "I'm sorry." "Me too." They stood in the quiet kitchen with the ghost of Sarah somewhere in the margins and the shape of Elena's grandmother present in every hand-cut joint. The moment stretched into something that felt like understanding. Riley stirred on the couch, mumbling about rocks and glitter glue. The spell broke. Elena stepped back, creating distance that felt both necessary and disappointing. "I should let you get her home." Nathan nodded and moved to wake his daughter. Riley protested consciousness with the indignation of someone interrupted mid-dream. He carried her across the lawn, her head heavy on his shoulder, her breathing already sliding back towards sleep. Jo met him at the door. "Found something. We should talk." But that conversation would have to wait, because Riley needed to be put to bed and Nathan needed a moment to process the fact that he'd spent an entire day in close proximity to another adult human, and hadn't felt the usual desperate need to retreat into the safety of solitude. Approximately Sunday morning, Jo spread documents across the kitchen table like a prosecutor building a case. Patricia Drummond has forced 6 other homeowners to sell in the past 18 months. All of them were minorities or recent immigrants. All of them sold to a company called Apex Properties for significantly below market value. Nathan poured coffee and tried to follow the thread. And Apex Properties was owned by Patricia's late husband. He died 2 years ago, but she maintained significant financial interest. She's essentially running a scheme where she uses her position as HOA president to create violations, apply pressure, force sales, and profit from the distress. That's legal? Technically, yes. Morally reprehensible and potentially actionable if we can prove discrimination. But the mechanics are within the law. Nathan thought about Elena's face when she'd talked about losing the house, about Riley's drawing of the Sioux lady, about the casual cruelty of a system designed to protect property values by destroying the people who created them. Elena's next. Elena's next. We're not letting that happen. Joe's expression shifted into something that looked like pride. No, we're not. They worked through the morning, Joe building a file of evidence while Nathan planned the week's construction schedule. Riley wandered between them, offering commentary and demanding breakfast and generally being six in all the ways that required constant attention and irregular snacks. At 10, Nathan's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it anyway. Mr. Brooks, this is Patricia Drummond from the HOA board. I'd like to discuss your arrangement with Miss Morrison. The polite menace in her voice set his teeth on edge. What arrangement? The construction work you're performing without proper permits or board approval. It's come to my attention that you're making significant structural modifications to a property in violation of our architectural guidelines. I'm performing emergency stabilization of a failing load-bearing structure. Section 4, paragraph B of the Municipal Building Code. Emergency repairs don't require pre-approval. Silence on the other end, calculating. I see you've done your homework. I'm a licensed contractor. Homework comes standard. Nevertheless, the board has concerns. I'll be stopping by tomorrow morning to inspect the work. The line went dead. Nathan set the phone down with more force than necessary. Patricia Drummond is coming to inspect tomorrow. Joe looked up from her laptop. Let her come. Make sure everything's by the book. Document everything. If she tries to issue a stop work order, we'll fight it. She's not going to make this easy. Nobody said it would be easy. They said it would be worth it. Nathan wasn't sure who they were, but the sentiment landed with the force of truth anyway. He spent the rest of Sunday at Elena's house, working with the urgency of someone trying to outrun a deadline. The new supports went up. The flashing got installed. By evening, the porch had bones again, solid, level, capable of bearing weight without the constant threat of catastrophic failure. Elena worked beside him, learning as she went, asking questions that suggested she was filing away information for future reference. She'd pulled her hair back into a ponytail that revealed a small scar behind her left ear. Her hands moved with increasing confidence, muscle memory forming in real time. How did you learn all this? My father, he was a Finnish carpenter, taught me the trade before I was old enough to realize it was a gift. Is he still? Heart attack, 10 years ago. I'm sorry seems inadequate. It is, but it's also all we have. They worked until the light failed and Nathan's back announced that it was done cooperating for the day. Elena made more terrible coffee. They sat on the newly reinforced porch steps and watched the neighborhood settle into evening. Lights coming on in windows, cars pulling into driveways, the ordinary rhythms of lives being lived in the assumption that tomorrow would arrive with similar reliability. Thank you. Elena's voice was quiet, almost lost under the ambient noise of a world winding down. For what? For not treating me like I'm broken. You're not broken. You're under pressure. There's a difference. She turned to look at him, and in the porch light her face held an expression he couldn't quite name. Something between gratitude and grief and the tentative beginning of hope. Riley's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. Your wife must have been. She was. The past tense sat between them, acknowledged and accepted. Elena's hand moved like it might reach for his, then thought better of it, returning to the coffee mug instead. I should go. Early morning tomorrow. He stood. She walked him to the property line, a distance of maybe 30 feet that felt longer in the dark. See you at 6? I'll bring better coffee. That's a low bar. Her laugh followed him across the lawn and into his own house, where Joe sat at the kitchen table, still working, still building the case that might save Elena's home from the carefully orchestrated collapse that Patricia Drummond had engineered. Riley was asleep in her room, clutching the stuffed rabbit that had been Sarah's last gift before the cancer made gift-giving impossible. Nathan stood in the doorway and watched his daughter breathe, counting the rise and fall of her chest the way he'd been doing since the hospital, since the moment he'd realized that control was an illusion, and the only thing he could actually do was show up and keep showing up until showing up became its own kind of salvation. Joe appeared behind him. She's fine. I know. So are you. I know that too. Do you? He didn't answer, just closed Riley's door with the careful quiet of someone who'd learned that sleep was sacred and interruption was a sin. In his own room, Nathan lay awake and stared at the ceiling and thought about porch supports and HOA violations and the way Elena's eyes had looked when she'd talked about her grandmother building something from nothing. Thought about Sarah and whether she'd approve of him spending his days helping a neighbor instead of maintaining the careful isolation he'd constructed around himself and Riley. Thought about the fact that he'd gone 3 entire days without the crushing weight of loneliness that usually accompanied consciousness. Small victories, maybe, but he'd learned to measure progress in inches instead of miles, in moments instead of months, in the slow accumulation of not terrible that eventually added up to something approaching okay. His phone buzzed. A text from Elena. Thank you for everything. See you tomorrow. He typed back, 6 a.m. Don't be late. So, her response came immediately. Wouldn't dream of it. Nathan set the phone on the nightstand and closed his eyes and let sleep pull him under with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring Patricia Drummond and her clipboard and her carefully weaponized rules. But it would also bring Elena and terrible coffee and the satisfaction of fixing something that had been broken. And for now, in this moment, that was enough. Patricia Drummond arrived Monday morning at 9:17 in a silver sedan that caught the sunlight like a threat. Nathan was installing the final porch support when she emerged carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression that suggested the weekend had been spent sharpening knives. Mr. Brooks, Miss Morrison. Elena stepped from inside the house and her shoulders went rigid the moment Patricia's heels clicked against the walkway. Nathan set down his drill, positioning himself where he could see both women clearly. Mrs. Drummond, I thought you were coming at 10. I don't schedule appointments to inspect code violations. Patricia's eyes cataloged every improvement with the precision of someone building a legal case. Nathan watched her pen move across the clipboard, knew she was documenting angles and materials and anything that could be weaponized later. The porch looks structurally sound. You do quality work, Mr. Brooks. The compliment felt like a trap. Emergency stabilization. The ledger board failed completely. Another week and the overhang would have collapsed. Unfortunate that you proceeded without board notification. Section 4, paragraph B. Emergency repairs to prevent imminent structural failure don't require pre-approval. Patricia's smile could have frozen water. I'm familiar with the municipal code. I'm also familiar with your business variants. It would be tragic if questions arose about whether you're operating within approved parameters. The threat hung in the air between them. Elena's hand found the railing and Nathan caught the tremor in her fingers. My variance is current. You're welcome to verify that. Oh, I intend to. She made another notation, the pen scratching with bureaucratic finality. Nathan felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice level. refusing to give her the satisfaction of visible anger. Is there an actual issue with the work, or are we just performing intimidation? The board has received complaints about noise, and this appears to be a significant structural modification rather than simple repair work. We replaced damaged wood with identical materials, same dimensions, same placement. That's the definition of repair. Patricia consulted her clipboard like it contained divine revelation. The Architectural Review Committee will make that determination. I'm issuing a stop work order effective immediately. They'll convene in 4 weeks to evaluate. 4 weeks. Nathan let the timeline speak for itself. 4 weeks meant leaving the porch exposed to weather, meant water damage spreading into the house, meant repair costs multiplying beyond anything Elena could manage. That's standard procedure. That's engineered failure. Her eyes narrowed. Careful, Mr. Brooks. Accusations of impropriety could be considered defamatory. Truth isn't defamation. He pulled his phone from his pocket and began photographing the completed work. The supports, the flashing, the properly installed components that met every code requirement. Patricia watched with the stillness of someone recalculating strategy. You seem unusually invested in your neighbor's problems. I'm invested in preventing unnecessary harm. How noble, though I wonder if your motives are entirely altruistic. The insinuation landed with practiced cruelty. Elena's face colored, but before she could respond, Nathan stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Patricia by exactly enough to shift the power dynamic. My motives are transparent. Can you say the same about Apex Properties' interest in this house? Something flickered behind Patricia's eyes, surprise maybe, or recognition that he knew more than she'd anticipated. I don't know what you're implying. $340,000, cash offer, 40% below market value. Convenient timing considering the manufactured violations. That offer was made in good faith to help Miss Morrison avoid financial hardship. That offer was made to profit from distress you created. Patricia's hand tightened on the clipboard, and for a moment Nathan thought she might abandon the pretense of professional courtesy. Instead, she stepped back, reassembling her composure like armor. The stop work order stands. Continue at your own risk. The board meets next Monday at 7 p.m. I suggest you attend if you wish to contest this decision. She walked to her car with measured steps, refusing to look rushed despite the clear dismissal. The sedan pulled away and silence settled over the porch like dust. Elena released the railing and sat heavily on the steps. She's going to destroy me. No, she's not. You heard her. 4 weeks. The porch will be ruined by then. The water damage alone. We're not waiting 4 weeks. Nathan sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Monday. We go to that board meeting. We present evidence. We end this. What evidence? She controls the board. They'll vote however she tells them to. Let me worry about the evidence. You just need to show up. Elena turned to face him, exhaustion and desperation warring in her expression. Why are you doing this? Really? This stopped being about a trade agreement days ago. The question deserved honesty, even if honesty felt like standing at the edge of something with no clear landing. Because watching you fight reminded me that isolation isn't the same as safety. That maybe the way forward isn't to protect yourself from caring, but to care anyway, despite the risk. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. She studied his face like she was reading a contract for loopholes, then looked away toward her house with its completed porch and its orange sticker still visible on the front door. I can't be someone's redemption project. You're not. This is just two people deciding that the world doesn't get to win by default. The community clubhouse occupied a brick building at the subdivision entrance, its architecture announcing civic importance through columns and landscaping that required professional maintenance. Nathan arrived at 6:45 Monday evening, carrying a folder thick with documents and wearing the only suit he owned, purchased for Sarah's funeral and worn exactly twice since. Riley sat in the truck with Joe, who'd agreed to keep her occupied during the meeting. His daughter had protested being excluded from what she called the big fight, but Nathan wasn't bringing a 6-year-old to watch bureaucratic warfare. "You sure about this?" Joe's question held genuine concern beneath the professional assessment. "No, but we're doing it anyway. Patricia won't surrender quietly. I'm counting on it. Desperation makes people sloppy." He kissed Riley's forehead through the truck window. "Be good for Aunt Joe. I'll tell you everything when I get back." "Are you fighting bad guys, Daddy?" "Something like that." "Then you'll win. Good guys always win." The certainty in her voice felt like a weight and a gift simultaneously. Nathan carried it into the clubhouse where folding chairs faced a table occupied by Patricia and 2 other board members who looked like they wished they were anywhere else. Residents filtered in, more than Nathan had seen at any neighborhood gathering. Word had spread about the confrontation and people arrived with the anticipation of witnesses about to observe something significant. Elena entered at 6:58, her face pale but determined. She wore a dark blazer that looked borrowed and carried herself with the fragile dignity of someone who'd spent the weekend preparing for the worst. Her eyes found Nathan's across the room and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe, or shared understanding that they were about to burn bridges that couldn't be rebuilt. George Mitchell arrived last, settling into a chair near the back with the quiet presence of someone who'd spent 15 years waiting for this moment. Patricia called the meeting to order at 7:03, her voice carrying artificial warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you all for attending. We have several items on tonight's agenda, but first we'll address the ongoing violation at 442 Elm Street. Miss Morrison, would you like to speak to the board?" Elena stood, her hands clasping the back of the chair in front of her. "Mrs. Drummond, the repairs to my porch were emergency stabilization work. The structure was failing. Mr. Brooks prevented catastrophic damage to my home. The board appreciates Mr. Brooks' concern for neighborhood safety. However, the work performed appears to constitute a major structural modification requiring architectural review. Our position, your position, is designed to fail." Nathan's voice cut through the room. He stood, folder in hand, and walked to the front where Patricia sat with her clipboard and her carefully constructed authority. "Mr. Brooks, you don't have the floor." "I'm yielding my time to him." Elena's interjection was immediate, her voice steady despite the tremor Nathan saw in her hands. He opened the folder and removed the first document, the property survey Patricia had commissioned 3 weeks earlier. This survey shows that Miss Morrison's fence encroaches 2 feet onto her own property. You demanded she demolish it and install wrought iron at a cost of $10,000 with 72 hours notice. He placed the survey on the table in front of Patricia. This same survey shows something else. The community clubhouse, this building we're sitting in, extends 4.3 feet over the municipal utility easement. That's a direct violation of City Code Section 12. The room went silent. The 2 other board members sat up straighter. Patricia's expression froze into something that might have been fear wearing a mask of professional composure. "That's a separate issue." "It's the same issue. You create violations to force sales. 6 families in 18 months, all minorities or immigrants, all pressured to sell to Apex properties at 40% below market value. Miss Morrison was supposed to be number 7. He placed another document on the table, Joe's research showing the pattern of forced sales, the connection to Apex properties, the profit margins that ran into 7 figures. This is speculation and conspiracy theory. Patricia's voice had lost its warmth, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. It's public record. Every sale is documented. Every HOA violation that preceded those sales is filed with the county. The pattern is clear to anyone who looks. A woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. "I'd like to see that documentation." Nathan handed her a copy. She read it, her expression darkening, then passed it to the person beside her. The documents circulated through the room like evidence at a trial. Patricia stood, abandoning her seat behind the table. This is highly inappropriate. Mr. Brooks is presenting unverified allegations designed to deflect from legitimate code enforcement. I can verify them. George Mitchell rose from his chair in the back, and every head turned toward him. He walked to the front with the slow deliberation of someone who'd spent 15 years carrying weight and was finally ready to set it down. My name is George Mitchell. I'm a retired civil engineer. 15 years ago, I provided the structural certification for this clubhouse. He pulled a rolled document from inside his jacket, yellowed paper that looked like it had been stored carefully, waiting for this exact moment. This is the original survey I prepared before construction. It shows the correct property boundaries and the utility easement. Richard Drummond, Patricia's late husband, asked me to modify the survey to show the clubhouse within legal boundaries. When I refused, he threatened to blacklist me from every municipal contract in the county. George's hands shook slightly as he unrolled the document. I had a wife with cancer and 2 children in college. I needed the work, so I falsified the certification. I've regretted it every day since. He placed the survey beside Nathan's documents. The room erupted. People standing, voices overlapping, questions firing from multiple directions. Patricia's face had gone white, her hands gripping the table edge. This is a coordinated attack. This is the truth. Nathan's voice cut through the chaos. Your husband built a scheme. You inherited it and expanded it. Used your position as HOA president to manufacture violations, apply pressure, force sales. Profited from people's desperation. Miss Morrison was next, except she had allies who knew how to fight back. Patricia's composure shattered like glass. She grabbed her clipboard and papers, shoving them into her bag with violent efficiency. This board will hear a motion to remove me, I assume. One of the other board members, a man in his 60s who'd remained silent until now, cleared his throat. I move to remove Patricia Drummond as president effective immediately, pending investigation into allegations of fraud and abuse of authority. Seconded. The vote was 8-1, Patricia the only dissenting voice. She walked to the exit with rigid steps, pausing at the door to look back at Nathan and Elena. You'll regret this. No, I don't think we will. She left. The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt like the end of something poisonous. The room devolved into discussion. Residents asking questions, demanding transparency, calling for audits of previous sales. George stood beside Nathan, looking simultaneously relieved and terrified. What happens now? Now you talk to a lawyer. Probably face consequences for the falsified survey. But you did the right thing tonight. That counts for something. Does it? It does to Elena, and to everyone else Patricia would have destroyed if this continued. The crowd began to disperse, people approaching Nathan and Elena with congratulations and questions and the kind of solidarity that emerges when someone successfully challenges entrenched power. Elena stood in the center of it, looking dazed, accepting handshakes and words of support with visible disorientation. Nathan caught her eye across the thinning crowd and tilted his head toward the exit. She excused herself and followed him outside where the parking lot lights cast orange pools across asphalt, and the night air carried the first hint of autumn coolness. We won! Her voice held disbelief, like she was testing the words to see if they'd dissolve. You won. You kept your house. We won. You risked everything, your business, your reputation, your relationship with the HOA. I risked nothing I wasn't willing to lose. She stepped closer, close enough that he could count the variations of relief and exhaustion in her expression. Why? You keep asking that. Because I still don't understand. 3 weeks ago we were strangers. Now you've just declared war on the entire power structure of this neighborhood. For me. Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of wood. Sanded, smooth, oiled to bring out the grain, carved with the numbers 442. I made this from the fence you were supposed to tear down. Your grandmother's fence. The one that's been standing for 40 years and will keep standing because it's part of your home's history. He held it out. Elena took it, her fingers tracing the carved numbers. It's beautiful. It's a reminder. Some things are worth fighting for even when the fight is expensive. And I'm one of those things? The question hung between them, fragile and dangerous and necessary. Nathan could deflect, could retreat into safe distance, could protect himself from the vulnerability of honest answer. Instead, he chose truth. You and Riley are teaching me something I forgot after Sarah died. That isolation doesn't prevent pain. It just makes you small. That caring about people means risking loss, but not caring means losing anyway. Elena's eyes went bright with tears that didn't fall. I don't want this to be pretend anymore. The dinners, the work on the porch, the way Riley talks about me like I belong in her life. I don't want it to be just circumstances bringing us together. Then say it. Say what? Say what you want, not what you think you should want or what's safe or practical. Say what you actually want. Her breath caught, the carved numbers pressed into her palm. I want to stay. I want to be part of your life and Riley's life. I want to stop being the sad lady next door and start being someone who matters to you. I want... Say it again. His voice was quiet, insistent. Elena looked up, meeting his eyes directly. I want to matter to you. You do. You have since the moment Riley drew that picture, maybe before. He closed the distance between them, slow enough that she could retreat if she wanted, deliberate enough that his intention was unmistakable. Elena's free hand found his chest, fingers spreading over his heart. Your wife would approve. She told Joe she wanted me to find someone who'd love Riley like she was theirs, someone who'd love me like I deserved. She was very specific about that. The information settled over Elena like permission. She rose on her toes, eliminating the last inches of separation, and kissed him with the kind of intention that felt like decision rather than impulse. Nathan's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and for the first time in 3 years, the act of holding someone felt like arrival instead of betrayal. When they pulled apart, he kept his forehead pressed to hers, breathing in the shared air between them. Riley's going to be insufferable about this. Elena's laugh was wet with tears she'd finally allowed to fall. She's been planning this since the first dinner. She's 6. She shouldn't be that good at matchmaking. She's your daughter. She inherited your competence. They stood in the parking lot while the last residents filtered out of the clubhouse, while George drove past with a small wave, while the neighborhood settled into evening routines that would continue regardless of the small revolution that had just occurred inside a civic building. Elena's hand found Nathan's, fingers interlacing with the casual intimacy of people who'd earned the right to simple touch. What happens now? Now we go home. I put Riley to bed. You go to sleep knowing your house is safe. Tomorrow we figure out what comes next. That's very practical. I'm a practical person. You just overthrew the HOA president using a 15-year-old survey and a retired engineer's confession. That's not practical. That's revolutionary. Maybe I'm expanding my skill set. They walked to their vehicles, separating at the property line that had become more metaphorical than physical over the past 3 weeks. Elena paused before getting into her car. Thank you for everything, for seeing me when I'd gotten very good at being invisible. You were never invisible, just waiting for someone to look. She drove away, and Nathan returned to his truck where Joe sat with Riley asleep in the back seat, her head pillowed on a stuffed rabbit that had been Sarah's last gift. Well? Joe's question was quiet, mindful of the sleeping child. Patricia's gone, George testified. Elena keeps the house. And? And what? And you kissed her in the parking lot. I may have been watching through the window. Nathan didn't deny it. She matters. I'm allowed to acknowledge that. Yes, you are. Joe squeezed his shoulder, then climbed out to transfer to her own car. Nathan drove home through streets that looked the same as they had 3 weeks ago, but felt fundamentally altered, like the geography had shifted in ways only he could perceive. Riley woke when he carried her inside, blinking against the porch light. Did you win? We won. I knew it. Good guys always win. He tucked her into bed and she grabbed his hand before he could retreat. Daddy, is Miss Elena going to be around more now? Probably. Is that okay? Riley's smile was gap-toothed and genuine. Mommy told me she would be. In my dream last night, she said she sent Miss Elena because we needed each other. Nathan's throat tightened. Mommy said that. She said you're allowed to be happy, and that she loves us and she's always watching, but she wants us to have someone who's here, not just in heaven. The theology was questionable, but the sentiment landed with the force of permission Nathan hadn't known he was waiting for. What else did Mommy say? That Miss Elena has sad eyes like you used to have. But they're getting happier, like yours are getting happier. She yawned, already sliding back towards sleep. I'm glad you're happy, Daddy. You smile more now. He sat beside her until her breathing deepened into the rhythms of unconsciousness, then made his way to his own room where Sarah's photograph still occupied the nightstand. He picked it up, studying the face he'd loved since college, the woman who'd given him Riley and taught him that love was worth the inevitable pain of loss. Thank you. He whispered it to the photograph, to the memory, to whatever part of Sarah existed beyond the physical world his daughter claimed to visit in dreams. For Riley, for the years we had, for telling Joe what you wanted from me, for being okay with me moving forward. He set the photo back in its place and pulled out his phone. A text from Elena. Thank you for tonight. For everything. Sleep well. He typed back. You too. See you tomorrow. Her response came immediately. Tomorrow and every day after, if you'll have me. Nathan smiled and set the phone aside, and for the first time in 3 years, sleep felt like rest instead of escape. Approximately 15 months later, the workshop expansion gleamed in afternoon sunlight, its sign reading Brooks and Morrison Design Build in letters Nathan had carved himself from reclaimed walnut. The grand opening had drawn neighborhood residents, former clients, and a handful of reporters interested in the story of the HOA president who'd been forced to resign after allegations of fraud. Patricia Drummond had faced civil suits from the 6 families she'd pressured into selling. George Mitchell had lost his engineering license but avoided criminal charges in exchange for testimony. The community clubhouse had been demolished and rebuilt on property that didn't violate utility easements. And Elena Morrison had kept her house. Nathan stood beside the new workshop entrance, Riley on one side and Elena on the other, watching people tour the space they'd designed together. Her vision, his execution, a collaboration that had expanded beyond business into something that looked remarkably like family. Riley, now 7.5, had appointed herself official tour guide, explaining to anyone who'd listen about load-bearing walls and proper wood joinery. With the confidence of someone who'd absorbed 3 years of carpentry education through proximity. She's going to be insufferable when she's a teenager. Elena's observation was delivered with affection rather than criticism. She gets it from you. The confidence, not the insufferability. I'm not confident, I'm competent, there's a difference. You're both. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Riley demonstrate the new table saw's safety features to George Mitchell, who nodded along with the patience of someone who'd found redemption in unexpected places. Joe appeared with champagne glasses, handing them out with the efficiency of someone who'd organized the entire event despite claiming she was just attending as family. Speech time. I don't do speeches. You built a business with your new partner. You're doing a speech. Nathan accepted the glass and moved to the center of the workshop where people gathered, conversations tapering into expectant quiet. He caught Elena's eye across the crowd, saw her nod encouragement, 3 years ago, I thought success meant finishing projects on time and keeping my daughter safe. That was the extent of my ambition. Build things, raise Riley, don't let the past consume the present. He paused, finding the words that felt true rather than performative. Then my neighbor had a problem. An orange sticker and an impossible deadline and a system designed to make her fail. And my daughter drew a picture of the sad lady next door and asked if we could help. Riley beamed from her position near the table saw. Helping meant risk, meant standing up to people with power and resources and no moral compass, meant trusting that doing the right thing mattered more than protecting myself from consequences. He looked at Elena, who'd moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his with the casual intimacy of 15 months of shared mornings and collaborative evenings. This business exists because two people decided that isolation was expensive and connection was worth the cost, because a 6-year-old understood what took me 3 years to learn. That family isn't just blood, it's choice. It's showing up. It's building something together that neither person could create alone. He raised his glass. To Brooks and Morrison Design Build, to second chances, to the people who taught me that the world doesn't have to win by default. The crowd echoed the toast, glasses clinked, conversation resumed. Nathan felt Elena's fingers tighten on his, felt Riley crash into his legs with a hug that threatened his balance. That was a good speech, Daddy. You think? Mommy would have liked it. She said it casually, the way she mentioned Sarah now. Present tense grief that acknowledged loss without being consumed by it. Nathan looked up at the sky, cloudless and blue and holding whatever remained of people who'd gone before. Yeah, I think she would. The afternoon faded into evening. Guests departed with promises to recommend the new business, to spread word about the partnership that had emerged from adversity. George was the last to leave, shaking Nathan's hand, with the grip of someone grateful for the chance to build something honest after years of carrying shame. You gave me my integrity back. That's not nothing. You gave it back to yourself. I just provided the opportunity. When the workshop finally emptied, Nathan locked the door and turned to find Elena and Riley waiting on the porch of the house that had started everything. The craftsman with the once sagging overhang that now stood solid and level and properly maintained. They sat together on the steps Nathan had rebuilt, Riley between them, the three of them watching the neighborhood settle into evening routines. Lights came on in windows, cars pulled into driveways, dogs barked. Life continued with the relentless normalcy that made crisis feel like temporary interruption rather than permanent state. Daddy? Yeah, baby girl? Can Mommy still see us, even though we're different now? The question carried the weight of a child trying to reconcile past and present, trying to understand if change meant betrayal or if growth was allowed. Every single day. And I think she's happy we found Miss Elena. I think she wanted us to be happy even after she couldn't be here to see it. Riley considered this, then nodded with the satisfied air of someone whose theology had been confirmed. Good, because I love Miss Elena. And I think Mommy would love her too. Elena's hand found Nathan's across Riley's shoulders. He squeezed gently, acknowledgement passing between them without need for words. The sky deepened from blue to purple to the particular darkness that comes before stars emerge. Somewhere in the house behind them, Sarah's photograph still occupied its place on Nathan's nightstand, present without being oppressive, remembered without preventing forward motion. Nathan looked at the porch they'd built, the fence that still stood after 40 years, the house that Elena had fought to keep and that Riley now considered a second home. Looked at the woman beside him who'd stopped being the sad lady and started being the person who made mornings feel like possibility instead of obligation. What are you thinking? Elena's question was quiet, private despite Riley's presence. That strength isn't standing alone. It's knowing when to build something together and having the courage to let people stay. She rested her head on his shoulder, careful not to disturb Riley, who'd started to drowse between them. "I'm staying, for as long as you'll have me." "Then you're staying forever. That's a long time. I'm very patient." Above them, stars began to emerge. Riley pointed at the brightest one, declaring it Mommy, even though the theology didn't support the claim. Nathan didn't correct her. Let his daughter believe what brought comfort. Let himself believe that Sarah was somewhere approving of the family that had formed in her absence, the love that had grown in soil fertilized by grief but watered by hope. The porch held them, solid, level, built to last, and Nathan thought about all the things that required rebuilding after loss, all the ways people learned to carry what they'd loved while making room for what came next. "Time for bed, Riley," she protested with the ritual objection of children everywhere before accepting the inevitable. Elena helped him get her inside, the three of them moving through bedtime routines with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this enough times that coordination required no discussion. When Riley was finally asleep, Nathan and Elena returned to the porch. The neighborhood had gone quiet, lights dimming as people retreated into their private evenings. Elena's hand found his in the darkness. "I never thanked you properly for fighting for this house, for fighting for me. You don't need to thank me. We fight for the things that matter, and you matter. So do you." They stood in the quiet, holding hands like teenagers, and Nathan felt the particular peace that comes from knowing you've arrived somewhere you were meant to be all along. Tomorrow would bring new projects, new challenges, the ordinary complications of running a business and raising a child and navigating a relationship, still learning its own shape. But tonight, in this moment, with the porch solid beneath his feet and Elena's hand warm in his and Riley sleeping safely inside, Nathan had everything he needed. The world hadn't won. They'd built something stronger, and that was enough.